So Oblivion Remastered released out of nowhere, and for some reason I seen in the system requirements the minimum specs is a NVIDIA GeForce 1070 Ti. Now I don't have a 1070 Ti, so I went to something that was close that I do have, which is a 1080, a GTX 1080, and we're just going to see how well does Oblivion Remastered run with a GTX 1080. Now, to start off, I put things on high settings and FSR to native, so I was actually kind of surprised, but I guess I shouldn't have been because the start of the game, you're basically in a tunnel and there's not a whole lot of stuff to load in, and the map that you're in while you're in the underground sewers and dungeon and stuff isn't very big, but it actually ran pretty well. It was 60 frames per second, or sometimes it dropped, but sometimes it went above, and it actually stayed above 60 frames per second most of the time. Now, I was actually just playing the game to get to a certain part that I wanted to test, so I didn't have the FPS on screen the whole time, but it was around 60 frames per second, so it started out looking pretty promising. But once I got outside, I began the testing and I set it to ultra, no FSR, and immediately was greeted with around 10 frames per second. So automatically I knew ultra settings was not even going to be remotely playable, but I tested it anyways and played for just a little bit. Next up, I switched it from ultra settings to high settings, and of course I kept ray tracing, well, hardware ray tracing off, but unfortunately you can't turn software ray tracing or lumen completely off, and I think that's why the performance is so bad all of the time. But anyways, I switched it to high settings, and I gotta be honest, the frame rate didn't really change. It was basically the same as ultra settings. Maybe you got a few more FPS, but high settings and ultra settings basically performed the same. In fact, it was almost so similar that I didn't even think it changed the settings properly, and I completely restarted the game. But nope, it just ultra settings and high settings basically perform pretty much the same. And the frame rate is also very inconsistent. Sometimes it will be in like 10 to 15 frames per second, and then you could just move just a little bit across the map, and then you could be getting 30 frames per second, and then it will drop back down to 10. Either way, it didn't hit the goal that I wanted to try and achieve, which was see what settings would be required to hit 60 frames per second on average. Next up was medium settings. I just did the quality level to medium, and I kept screen space reflections on, which also screen space reflections don't lower the frame rate pretty much at all. Maybe it's like 1 to 2 frames per second, but you might as well have them on because it doesn't really lower your frame rate, or at least it didn't seem to when I tested it. When I had it off and when I had it on, it was pretty much the same exact frame rate. But anyways, with medium settings, you gain maybe about 5 to 6 frames per second, but you still struggle to hit 30 frames per second on average with medium settings at 1080p on a 1080. At this point, I am starting to think that either the game is broken, unoptimized, or it might just be because of the software ray tracing that is always on. You can't turn it off. You can only turn it on low or high. You can't completely turn it off, which is unfortunate, but I think that is also probably the main reason for performance being so terrible. And so next, of course, I put it on low settings to see maybe, just maybe, we could hit 30 frames per second on average on low settings at 1080p. And I'm not even sure if it's surprising at this point, but we did get 30 frames per second, though it did stay in the 20s a lot. Honestly, from high settings, medium settings to low settings, you're honestly not gaining that many frames, and I think it's because of the software ray tracing. I think it's no matter what we do with the settings, the game will just run pretty bad because of the software ray tracing. the lumen that is always turned on. I think that's just the reason it will always run bad. But yeah, even at 1080p lowest settings, we cannot even get 30 frames per second on average while exploring. Now, you can always get way more FPS. I'm talking in the 60s to 70s even, when you're in like houses or dungeons, sewers, even the city of whatever it's called, Cyrodiil or something. I forgot. Basically, the game runs pretty decently in every area besides the open world area. So if you're in the open world and you're exploring, the frame rate is going to be all over the place and sometimes even extremely low. But if you're in a dungeon, once again, the frame rate is going to be pretty smooth. It's going to be like 60 frames per second most of the time. But I mean, you're going to be exploring the open world a lot, so that's what you're going to be experiencing, and it's just going to drop into the 20. I also tested low settings with FSR on quality, balance, performance, and ultra performance, and sadly, if we want a 60 frames per second most of the time and on average, then we have to stick with FSR on ultra performance at 1080p with the lowest settings. And of course, the game looks really bad. I mean, not only is the settings on low, but FSR on ultra performance just looks extremely blurry at 1080p, and it just looks like someone rubbed Vaseline all over my screen, and it is just a blurry mess at this point. But it is the only way to get 60 frames per second all the time. Well, most of the time actually, because sometimes it looks like it's about to drop into the high 50s, so it might do that in later areas of the game. So if you want the best performance in this game with the 1080, you're going to have to set it to lowest settings with ultra performance or a lower resolution than 1080p. But if you're fine with 30 frames per second, you can go around medium settings with FSR on balanced, and you'll hit 30 frames per second most of the time and have a decent experience. Honestly, I'm not sure exactly what I expected the 1080 to do in this game, how well I thought it would perform, but I'm kind of disappointed. I kind of thought it would perform a little bit better. Now, I haven't tested this game or seen anything else on this game. Maybe this game is just completely unoptimized. I'm not sure. I know having software ray tracing on all the time and no option to turn it off definitely hurts a lot of potential performance on other cards. Like, there's going to be a ton of graphics cards that are going to struggle just because ray tracing cannot be turned off. Honestly, at this point, with how this game performs on a 1080, if you have a 1080, you're probably better off just playing the original. I mean, it's just as good, if not better. But anyways, that's going to be it for this video, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to hit that like button. Leave a comment below, tell me what you think of Oblivion Remastered and its performance, and what you're playing Oblivion Remastered on, and what you thought of this video. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because you want to be subscribed, and I'll see you next time.